You're listening to Live Free, Think Free on 90.1 KPFT Houston, your home for uncensored news and underground music since 2011.
All right, KPFT, 5 o'clock drive time. Hope y'all are all having a good day. My name is Micah. I'm here with my friend and co-host Derrick. We're
What's
on
going
Live
on?
Free, Think Free. Just glad to be here. I know we're going to have a fun show talking about a lot of stuff. I've been having a good week. I know Houston has been getting rain. Glad to have that here. What's been going on with you, Derrick?
Glad there's rain going on over there. You know, the thing is, and I never really thought about this until I moved out of Houston, or maybe even just and specifically to Mexico. But I've come to really, really, truly appreciate the rain because you have like and I guess it's somewhat similar in Houston, but not exact, where like we have two seasons, dry and wet, and that's pretty much it. And we're at the point where it's the wet season and we get rain every single day. And so there's, rain every single afternoon. You can like set your watch by it. Like probably while we're doing this show, it's going to start storming like it's the end of the world. And then the sun comes out and it's really beautiful. But then by the time you get around October, stops, no rain, like not a single drop of rain for 6 months or so. And so you kind of do learn to appreciate it a little more. At least I have. So that's been cool. But yeah, things are good out here. I'm excited to talk about what's going on in Houston. We're going to talk about some bigger pictures, some updates from the CDC. I've got some news that we didn't get to cover last week, including I know you wanted to talk about the whole IRS situation, Micah, and this new 87,000 person workforce. I also wanted to talk about some examples of big tech censorship of COVID science, science facts that have been censored by the likes of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. over the last 2 years, and how we now know that this is not just some conspiracy ravings of the random voice coming out of your radio on 90.1 KPFT on a Friday afternoon, but documented in emails that have been released through various lawsuits. So we're going to get into all that and more. But first, I want to remind everybody, again, we broadcast weekly on KPFT Houston, been broadcasting in the Houston area. They've been on air for 50 years now, Micah, and we get to be a part of that legacy. We've been on KPFT for going on the last 4 or 5 years. I've been working with the local news since 2014. We're so excited to be there. And so our show airs Friday afternoons at 5 p.m. And then, of course, online at thehoustonfreethinkers.com and also as part of the Conscious Resistance Network. And I just want to remind our viewers again at the beginning of the show that all this month we are getting support for our show as well as for KPFT through a partnership with Live Free Academy from our buddy John Bush. And they are offering this homesteading on a budget workshop all this month. It's going to launch September 3rd. So if you've ever thought you want to learn more about growing food, storing food, anything about homesteading, but you thought you're short on cash or short on space, they've got a group of experts. They're going to give you some tips on how to be prepared for things like inflation and potential supply chain shortages or changes and things like that. And if you're interested in that whole thing, again, the homesteading on a budget workshop, you can go to thehoustonfreethinkers.com. There's a banner on our front page. You can click that and find out more. So
no doubt. I'm with you there, Derrick. I think that's all exciting stuff. People are looking to learn more about it all the time. I've got friends at work that are so happy to have chickens now, and they're going to be bringing me eggs. And with one of the other individuals there, they've got a good garden, and they're going to be the individual with the chickens. He's kind of lazy. He doesn't want to tend a garden, so he's trading eggs to her for her garden. Overflow. I do want to remind everyone, as you said, we are on KPFT. Happy to be part of that legacy for over 50 years. Not us, but KPFT. And I think it's really exciting that we get to talk about all these different issues on FM radio at such a great time and to so many people. I think anybody interested in these issues should recognize how important that is. And we gotta keep it on the air somehow, right? And we're not having they don't force commercials on us, so Derrick and I aren't interrupted with something from Exxon or whoever it might be. I don't know, Sam's, Walmart. I don't know. It could be horrible. It could be. I don't know. I can't go on about it.
I think the show would be a lot less fun if we had to deal with that. I think the show would be a lot less fun if we had to deal with saying, "Oh, and our show is brought to you by Exxon."
No doubt, no doubt. And I want to remind everybody to keep that happening. It doesn't, they don't say how much or how little you can contribute. But if you go to kpft.org, there's a big red donate button on the right. You can donate a car. You can donate with Cash App. You can donate with PayPal. You can donate. The main thing is to donate. Donate in the name of Free Thinker Radio. I believe you can even call 713-526-5738.
In the name of Live Free, Think Free.
Oh, yeah! In the name of Live Free, Think Free, there is no more Free Thinker Radio. It's gone. There's no such thing, is what I hear. It could be true, it could be not true, but I hear it, and that's what matters. So
definitely go ahead. Go visit kpft.org, guys. We do appreciate the support. As Micah said, this gives us a voice on FM radio. As I was just saying, and we're going to get into it tonight, there's outright censorship. And I don't mean just moderation by a private company, but collaboration between governments and corporations working to silence views and opinions. Censorship. That is going on the internet, the free and open worldwide internet that we all sort of maybe take for granted as being so free, and maybe even look at things like radio as sort of old hat. But in this case, we are able to talk about certain things that we might get censored on the internet for, and reach more people by doing it on the radio as well as streaming this through the internet. So yeah, we appreciate everybody. And again, visit kpft.org to make an investment in the name of our show, Live Free, Think Free. And then once again, you can go to our website, thehoustonfreethinkers.com. You can find out more ways to support us, including that homesteading on a budget workshop. All right, Micah, let's jump into it. I know you got a show you want to cover. I got the local news story, and we got a lot to cover. So let's do it.
No doubt, no doubt. I've been really enjoying the resurgence in the music scene. I know Johnny's got a lot of shows. You should think about checking out House of J's page, and I know you'll know a lot of stuff going on there. But I did want to mention some friends of ours, Dustin the Void, former members of Funeral Horse. They also perform the Last for the Community. Will be performing along with Only Beast, who's come through some benefit shows and I believe appeared even on this show before. Or its former name, and a band I don't know about, but maybe should discover, called the Nerve Curlers. And this is all going on August 20th. That's Saturday. Kicks off at 8 a.m. at Black Magic Social Club. That's a club I want to make it out to. A lot of bands have been playing out there. They got a really interesting poster, I think. I like the poster for the show. Some posters are really good art, and some are just kind of, they don't hit you at all. But nonetheless, Houston does have a vibrant music scene, and I'm happy for KPFT to be able to bring music to you as we do in this show, and we plan to later. But that's the only show I really wanted to shout out this time. I haven't dug too deep to find things to get into. I did look for some activism stuff. I saw some book buys and stuff like that, but I didn't see an awful lot on the calendar for this weekend. But yep, you can get out, find it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there is stuff going on. Check it out. I look forward to being back in Houston in the next couple months. And as I was talking to you about before the show, performing my music, while we're talking about music, I'm working on my debut album, 10 to 12 songs under the name 33, doing some hip hop. And I'm really excited. I've just been feeling super inspired lately to tell this story. It's called Transmutation. So when I come back to Houston in the next couple months, hoping to perform either at the House of J or maybe check out some of these new venues. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's jump into some news. I got this one story, Micah, that just popped up on my radar before we did this show here about Missouri City, which for those who are unaware is in the Houston area, just outside of Houston. And it's kind of interesting. I think this maybe can open up a little bit of a conversation on this whole thing. Missouri City Council passes massage parlor ordinance. And in ordinance, the city would require massage parlors to have certain application requirements that would have to be updated, outside windows that are transparent, licensed therapists with their licenses visibly displayed, and no ATMs allowed on the sites. So, okay, let's read before I insert my opinion. Missouri City Council passed a new ordinance that increases regulations. That's right. It would require certain application requirements have to be updated, outside windows transparent, all the things we just said. Also requires doors to be unlocked during business hours and a peace officer to be granted access. And according to the ordinance, it says, quote, massage establishments have been shown to be detrimental to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the citizens of the city, and therefore such activities must be regulated. Owners who are not in compliance will have to forfeit their certificate of occupancy or have it suspended. And Missouri City currently has 16 massage businesses operating within their city ordinance, their city limits, which I guess is is part of this. And they have a statement from a woman who says that she was once trafficked in Fort Bend County, which is the county where Missouri City's at, just outside of Houston in Harris County. And she's saying, quote, "What these ordinances do is decrease demand for sex buying in the city. In addition to that, they prevent them from opening up in the first place. They can't get through the permitting process. There are teeth built in that go back and close them down." So I don't know that what she just said is accurate or is true. I don't know that it's false either. I'm just saying I don't know. I haven't looked into that research that maybe she has as far as specific research that shows these type of ordinances decrease demand for sex buying in the city, as she just stated. But I definitely do know that this is clearly an increase in regulation of a business, like no ATMs, down to the type of windows that you can have. And obviously governments do these sort of thing all the time. And it's maybe not that surprising to people, but yeah, outside of the sort of connection and the attempt to stop trafficking or sex crimes, which I think is what this woman's referring to because they mentioned trafficking, it's definitely a government overreach for sure.
So they were saying a lot of people are trafficked through massage parlors.
Yeah, which I think is a real thing. I mean, I think that definitely does happen. Like Houston has Houston. I mean, we could talk about Houston specifically. Houston, remember we talked over the years. They created the rule, the Sweet 16 thing, that like you're allowed to have certain kind of strip clubs and this and that, and like, and we've seen parlors get raided even. And then there's other places where these parlors are sort of hubs or fronts for actual trafficking. I remember there was a case a couple years ago right off 45, not far from where we were living at the time. But yeah, I guess that's what this is aimed at.
It's a difficult thing to even talk about, it's easy to take a dogmatic stand on it, and say, look, it's horrible for, government to regulate any business, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess it comes into, again, what's the proper role of the use of force? I don't know. I mean, clear glass, does this help? ATMs, in the abstract, I might say, why would you stop a business from having ATMs? How's that connected, et cetera? What's this? Trying to stop cash flow? I don't understand in some ways. And then in other ways, I can understand why, if people were being I just think that if it was so bad that people were consistently being trafficked through these businesses, are you telling me the police couldn't just do something about that, and that somehow no ATMs and clear windows is going to do what policemen with badges and guns and authority of the state couldn't do? So that's kind of where I come on it. I understand a motivation to stop people being violated by force as they are in human trafficking, but I'm not sure how to use force to do that. And if it's already the way we stop it is by the use of force through law of going and arresting people for human trafficking and prostitution and all these different things, that's already there. So it's another one of these things that it defies the mind. I mean, is it to make them spend more money and have less sources of income? I don't know. Is it to appear to do something? I mean, how much of it do you think might be that, Derrick? I mean, how much of it might be to appear to be doing something about a problem that maybe no one's really doing anything about? Because you got men, what is it? How many legion of police officers now who cannot stop it, but clear windows and ATMs being gone will? I think it's more an appearance thing, and I think it's going to cost businesses money.
Yeah, so you're listening to Live Free, Think Free right now. We broadcast every week on 90.1 KPFT Houston and on the Conscious Resistance. We're talking about this new ordinance in the Houston area, Missouri City, requiring a number of new regulations for massage parlors in an attempt, or at least that's the way the story was framed, to go after human trafficking. And we've got a couple of interesting comments. Daryl Ernst says, "Always human trafficking. Why can't people be adults and admit that there are women who would prefer to sell themselves over flipping hamburgers for $7.25 an hour?" And I think that Daryl maybe is taking a derogatory tone with that, but I think that what he points to is a reality, is that there are in some cases, I don't want to say all cases, definitely not all cases, because human trafficking does exist, but there are cases where people do voluntarily prostitute themselves or voluntarily go out to do sex work. And And in fact, Micah, it's interesting because, what they're talking about here, massage parlors, it almost kind of feels sort of old school, right? Like, because think about the internet now, like it's OnlyFans, it's locals. It's like there's a million streaming websites out there where young entrepreneurial people, men or women, could go create accounts and can, do sex work online if they wanted to, streaming, these cameras that people do. And that's a quite popular industry, and people are making money that way. And I think that to me is like, that's a voluntary consensual thing. People are legitimately doing that, but that's totally different from the idea that somebody is being, forced to work in a massage parlor, and then, forced to travel and things like that. Because when I covered human trafficking in Houston years ago, around the time of the Super Bowl, one of the things that I learned from interviewing various people who work in some of the, some of these strip clubs in Houston, and some that also have people who are clearly being trafficked. I talked to different people, including what are they called? The bouncers who've been bouncing at these clubs for 20 plus years, and said that sometimes women will show up at a club or say at a massage parlor, and they show up in different cars, and they seem to be coming there, completely on their own volition, and they do the work and stuff. But then in reality, they've had situations where they found out like those women were actually living in a house or a hotel together with a pimp, like waiting back for them. And, he had their passports or was threatening them in some sort of way and was like, hey, go to work. And so they show up in separate cars to appear totally disconnected. But in reality, they're, being trafficked in some way. So I say all that to just say, like, these things do happen. Some people do want to go pursue sex work voluntarily, and people are trafficked in situations that might seem voluntary or consensual that might not be.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to be made, because it's subtle and people don't always see it. And I think that's quite often a problem with interpretation. So yeah, it's good to make that distinction there. So what else we got to get into? I know we've
got a couple more stories pulled up here. I got one that you had about fentanyl. If you want to get into this one, I think this is kind of important.
Yeah, the fentanyl one is a little bit disturbing, and I'm really not sure what to say about a relief for it. So yeah, that one's shocking. It turns out that, and we've been talking about fentanyl and the problems with it for a while here on Freethinker Radio, but Customs and Border Protection reported seizing 2,071 pounds of fentanyl coming in from the southern border in July. I mean, in 1 month. That's more than 60% more than the previous record, and I imagine this is probably the latest we talked about, which was set in April, and more than triple the 640 pounds that they nabbed in June. It almost equals the amount of fentanyl seized in the entire year 2019. I mean, so I think we need to think about that a little bit. I mean, that's a lot of fentanyl. And they say that's worrisome because authorities argue that the number of seizures is a yardstick for overall flow. When more fentanyl is found, more is getting through. That means a devastating amount of drugs likely breach the border. Prices are currently rising faster than they have for 40 years. Oh, I don't even understand why that cut in there. But yeah, that's a lot of fentanyl, and they're saying it's enough, basically to kill every American that they've seized. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, well, what I was going to say, and maybe we can talk more about this in the second half of the show. We'll do a little bit more international news, because what this makes me think of is, well, again, I live here in Mexico, and this is where the fentanyl is coming from. And there's some interesting components, actually. I started looking into it. You have different elements of like Chinese criminal organized crime that are supplying some of the components and shipping it or sending it here to cartels then like making fentanyl and meth and other things like that, and then using the tunnel systems and like bringing it into the United States, and it makes so it's like a international thing going on here, and it's crazy. But yeah, we know plenty of people who have died, and there's people in Houston who've died of taking something maybe they didn't even know had fentanyl in it, because it doesn't take much at all to kill somebody. And we've we've been covering the opioid crisis in general the last couple of years, and I really think this is part of it, because fentanyl is an extremely dangerous opioid, and it's not one that people typically seek out to take. It's like people are being killed by taking things they don't even know about. And yeah, I mean, there's without getting fully into it right now, there was some recent violence on the border in Tijuana on the Mexican side, just in the last week, related to some gang activity. I don't know if you would say cartel, like a super organized crime, but definitely some gang activity out there, probably related to drugs and the drug war. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that you just can't have this conversation without really acknowledging the role that the drug war in the United States and the drug war in Mexico, which was pretty much declared in the last decade or so, that I've learned, and the disastrous impact it's had, because trying to criminalize the drugs has led to cartel violence, but then also now it's grown to the point where it's not even about drugs anymore. Yeah, right now one of the products of some of the cartels is fentanyl, but some of them are also getting involved in the avocado trade, or they're just taxing farmers, or they're just, anything they can make money off of, because they're criminals. They're just like, that's just what their MO is, I guess. But
they got bills and someone's got to pay them.
Someone's got to pay. But I just wanted to bring that in because that's like the kind of like international scope of it is like, yeah, it's saying there's enough fentanyl to kill every American they found in July, it says, which is crazy. And that's coming through Mexico via China.
And this kind of brings in some questions that's really difficult, I think, for a lot of people, because this is obviously a killer drug. I don't know what else it could be called. It's not something that people seem to want to do recreationally that the government's prohibiting. I mean, maybe there's some people out there doing it recreationally. I don't know. It's not being used to help fight cancer and things like that, So this is one of those things that, when the border and the customs seizes this much, people see, further justification, right? Like, look, they had enough to kill every American. They just saved all of us. They need more funding. So I don't know. I think you're
right about that. I think that it does offer up a chance for people to argue from to try to justify the drug war and why they think this is necessary.
So what do you do in the face of that? Because that's the thing here, right? And I think anybody who wants a rational approach to drugs would probably agree that fentanyl is a highly dangerous substance that needs to be, handled with care, for lack of a better word. And then all of a sudden, what are you going to do besides, I guess what you're going to do is tell your friends and tell people not to take things they don't know what they are, because we've had numerous reports of people who never did anything recreationally dying.
We can do, I think there's multiple ways to approach this thing from a place that, and this is the solutions to approach that don't involve calling for government. So one thing is harm reduction, right? So places like House of J and other venues in Houston who know that there's a problem, that people are dying from fentanyl, and they also know that some of those people are going to use drugs, right? And there's no way around it. Why? Some people say no, we need to just have abstinence. We need to have prohibition and stop all the drug users, put them to death, as Trump recently called for. Other people are saying, look, let's acknowledge that some people are going to go out and use drugs. Let's at least try to make it safe for them, right? So you at your local venue, you provide Narcan, which is used to stop people who are overdosing from opioids. Maybe you have drug test kits so that people who are going to party can at least test their quality. And they're like, hey, man, you just tried to sell me something and it says it's got fentanyl in it. What the heck? Get out of this. You've used those methods. I think that's one way. But then also, and again, I don't mean to make it simplistic because maybe it wouldn't be this way, but I just got to feel that, like you said, most people aren't seeking out fentanyl as a party drug. They're accidentally taking it, or they think, it's being used to cut heroin or to cut other drugs, and, people make money. But maybe that wouldn't even be a thing if the other drugs that people want access to were not criminalized, were not made illegal. If people could more readily get access to chemicals and substances that they want for right or for wrong. And I'm not promoting drug addiction or drug abuse. I'm just saying that is just a fact of life. If that was the case, then maybe we wouldn't have people ending up dying from fentanyl. I mean, again, obviously if somebody's accidentally taking one thing and it has fentanyl, there's no controlling that. But still, I feel like that market wouldn't even be necessary if there was a market for the other drugs that are widely available. I just think that is not everybody who is going to use hard drugs just because one drug's illegal, but I do think it does have an effect and an impact.
Definitely. These are the difficult conversations that news stories such as this and a deeper analysis of them require. And of course, we're thankful for KPFT providing the opportunity to have this conversation. And we thank everybody for their comments. We'll be getting into them throughout the show. I know we're going to have some music come up in a little bit. I don't know.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right.
Let's do a song. We got Distant Dream, Jeremy Carswell. Should we do that?
Yeah, Carswell sounds good. Let's listen to some Carswell.
Cool, because I know you got some stories. I got some to cover, but we're about halfway through the show. We might as well play a song. So, guys, stay tuned. You're listening to Live Free, Think Free, 90.1 KPFT Houston. Again, if you like what we're doing, you want to hear more uncensored news, underground music, go to kpft.org and make an investment in the show. We'll be right back.
All right, that's good to hear. Some different new Jeremy Carswell off 2025. I think that's probably the first time we've played this show, so that's always fun. And if you'd like music you enjoy played here, just send it to us, message it to us, send us a CD, whatever you want to do like that. You can message visionarynoise@gmail or music@visionarynoise.com. Yeah, so we love sharing music. We love getting into new music, and we love exploring music. It's a big part of our show and always has been and always will be. So yeah, and as we mentioned, if you enjoy that aspect, kpft.org, big red donate button. That's what it's all about, at least for a short term. And they've got goodies, depending on the level. So you might want to actually call through and talk to someone. I don't know, but live free. Tell them that.
I want to mention again too, as well, in addition to supporting our show and just independent community radio. By visiting kpft.org, you can also go to our website, thehoustonfreethinkers.com. And I mentioned earlier, we're spending this month partnering with Live Free Academy and their workshop, upcoming homesteading on a budget workshop that you can check out if you're interested in that kind of stuff, homesteading, growing food. And again, for those who are new to that, it's going to be taught by some permaculture teachers, permaculture experts, Marjorie Wildcraft, Paul Wheat, and some others. And you can find out all about that and more at our website, thehoustonfreethinkers.com. But let's go ahead and jump forward, Micah. The title of today's show, I called it, Did the CDC Just Admit That They Were Wrong? Did the CDC just admit wrongdoing? And it might appear that way in some regard. At least that's what some of the headlines are claiming. We got this one: CDC orders reorganization, saying COVID response did not reliably meet expectations. CDC director admits to COVID-19 mistakes, announces shakeup. Top U.S. health official admits dramatic mistakes in tackling COVID. So what's this all about? What are you seeing?
I thought that it was interesting. There's a couple of things I saw coming out of kind of the COVID/CDC thing. And one thing was interesting, I thought, was the director of the U.S. CDC saying that they were going to announce a reset. It seems like that word is just kind of, assumed to necessarily be a good thing, right? Or being projected as such. So yeah, they're going to announce a reset. And this reset is going to focus on making the organization quicker at responding to new health threats amid criticism of its response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't know. I don't know. Did anybody really say they weren't quick enough? The director of the U.S. CDC said Wednesday that the reset will focus on making the organization quicker at responding to new health threats, and the budget will be $12 billion, and they have more than 11,000 employees. So, I don't know. We'll wait to see what the reset for the CDC really is. It sounds like mostly it's going to be, be dressed up ways of doing their job and, making scientific reports and actionable data out quicker. I don't know what kind of infrastructure they're going to argue for in order to do that, but I'm sure we'll learn more in the upcoming months.
Yeah, and I think that this is something one of the concerns I heard today from some various people online, like that. Well, what does this mean when they're talking about shaking up? They want to make sure that they don't remake the mistakes that they made over the last couple of years. And it sounds like to me an opportunity, or at least a call for why the CDC should be bigger or needs more funding, those kind of typical things that we see. It also reminds me of 9/11 and other sort of crises that we faced, how after they happened, government agencies claimed they didn't have enough money or knowledge or intelligence to figure this out, and they made some mistakes, and now we need to do better, and that doesn't usually end up good for the people. And the other thing is, like you said, Micah, like how they're like, we're going to try to go faster and release more research and stuff. It's like, wait, I don't know if we're talking about the same mistakes. Like, maybe I don't think anybody's out there saying, I think the CDC didn't move fast enough. The CDC didn't do enough. There wasn't enough lockdowns. There wasn't enough mandates.
There weren't enough back and forths on masks, and there weren't enough, distance, projections, and I don't know. Another thing I thought was interesting that I'd seen before is how they said that their work during the COVID crisis had not met expectations. I'm kind of like, whose expectations? What work? I get what your work is supposed to be, but it kind of makes you wonder, what expectations did they have? How could you have expectations pre-COVID? I guess like maybe they have the expectations to inform the public about diseases and these general things, right? And if we say, well, they failed on that, I don't know. I think the CDC let us all know that this thing was out there.
Yeah, well, another interesting one, like we said, we'll have to follow this in the coming months to see what this plays out like. And I want to talk about this though, because we don't have the time for this show to really focus on all the different mistakes made by the CDC and the public health bodies, but we have covered them for the last 2 years. We could do a short list that would start with things like promoting the use of the PCR test, telling people that the vaccines were 98%, or that they were 98% effective, when obviously that wasn't the case. That has turned out to not be the case. Telling people that they were perfectly safe, that there wouldn't be any adverse reactions. Telling us that people wouldn't lose their jobs if they all kinds of things that we heard from the CDC and the government at large. And a big part of that, Micah, over the last couple of years has been censoring and kind of going after people who talk about these things, people who say like, hey, I think I might have had an adverse reaction. You remember last year we played a clip from that woman, Dom. She has the Instagram woman. She's like an Instagram influencer, regular woman doing her thing. And then she took the shot and she had adverse reaction. It took her a couple of months before she shared her story. She got attacked by people claiming like, how dare you say this, when she's just trying to share her personal experience of what happened to her, right? And we've seen, we showed on our show here the, what was it? The Ron Johnson, I think, hosted the press conference with the different families and the victims of vaccine injuries. So this information has been out there, and those types of people, including Senator Ron Johnson, not that I'm a fan of him in particular or anything like that, have been censored. Those people have been told that they're liars, that they're crazy, that you're not, they're not hurt, they didn't experience these things, like literally denying people's experiences, which is pretty crazy to me. And at the same time, people like us who have been talking about these things have faced deletions, bans, shadow banning, deletion of videos, loss of monetary funding in many cases, people losing their YouTube channels or their ability to raise money on Patreon, or being denied off PayPal because they're spreading alleged misinformation. Well, many of us have been saying, like, guys, this is a collaboration between big tech, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and the government. Other people say, no, well, I thought you libertarians or you freedom people, you thought, private businesses, right? They can do whatever they want. But now you want the government to get involved or something like this. And myself, I've been trying to get people to look at the history of companies like Facebook and Google and see that they're really not this independent companies that were just created in college dorms or garages, that they have at the least seed funding from InQtel, which is the CIA's venture capital firm. And in many cases, they do benefit as well from subsidies from various types of statism and corporate welfare. And so there is a relationship that exists there. Well, now we have even more evidence of this relationship, Micah, and these new emails that came out from a lawsuit from the America First legal organization, which is, obviously a Trump supporting organization, but they basically filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration. And they did so because in July 2021, former White House press secretary Jen Psaki, she said that in summer of 2021, 1 year ago, that the White House, the Biden administration, was working with social medias to, quote, identify and counter misinformation. And she said they are, quote, regularly making sure social media platforms are aware of the latest narratives dangerous to public health that we and many other Americans are seeing. And we work to engage with them to better understand the enforcement of social media platform policies. So I guess in response to that, this organization is like, hey, let's file a Freedom of Information Act request and see what kind of emails we might come out that show communication with Facebook or social media companies. And so they filed this for the Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services, the CDC, the FDA, and the NIH. And they recently got, I think, 286 pages of emails that have come out that they've released. And they clearly show like a pretty cozy relationship, Micah, between these companies. And I don't think that, I don't know, I don't think most Americans, at least I don't know, maybe this is just already a lost idea on some people, but I don't think most people think that corporations and governments have this kind of cozy relationship. And especially in this case where it's social media, where most people get their knowledge from. And I don't know. So in these emails, though, there's a woman by the name of Carol Crawford, who's the digital media chief for the CDC in Atlanta. And she sent out these BOLO, be on the lookout meetings, where the CDC shared information that they called misinformation. And they shared this information with Twitter, Facebook, and Google. And she basically helped arrange a slideshow where she created this little kind of a table that says, like, here's examples of tweets and Facebook posts that we're seeing that are examples of misinformation. Please be on the lookout for similar things and take them down, or, do what is appropriate or whatever, right? And so we have one email showing Twitter requesting help from the CDC to identify misinformation. And maybe people think that's innocuous. They should be collaborating together. But there's more. We can go further. CDC also requests that Google modify their search results to better promote the CDC's vaccine page. Another email shows the CDC directly making edit in Google's knowledge base, which is kind of interesting. So that's like a pretty cozy relationship. But the most I think disturbing thing of it all, and this is kind of the point that I want to get to, including this next story that I got Mike on, the study that just came out related to the shots. But the examples of misinformation that they highlight include claims that the Pfizer shot could cause damage to sperm or potentially cause infertility. This claims that we've been seeing on social media for a while now that have now been confirmed. But these were things that a year ago we were being told were misinformation, and people were being censored on social media because the CDC and the government said so. Now here I pulled up a study just recently published in the last couple months. COVID vaccination temporarily impairs semen concentration and total motile count among semen donors. I mean, that's just one study that I could find with a quick search, and that's just in the last couple months, right? So, but if you said that, you would be censored, right? And then we can go further. We see them talking about, there's an email from May 2021 that says, we want to point out two issues we are seeing a great deal of misinformation about: vaccine shedding and microchips. And then she has a table with a list of different articles or tweets that she came across, including one for Ryan Christian of the Last American Vagabond, where I write for, based on one of his broadcasts. And this broadcast had the title of COVID vaccine shedding, and that was what it was called. And the CDC emailed about this and highlighted his tweet about this as an example of misinformation. But once again, I can pull up 3 articles right now, which I have right here, that have come out in the last year. And we heard this from Jennifer Bridges. Micah, you remember the nurse who was fighting the mandates back in Houston? She got fired. She was telling us a year ago that she was seeing women who were having menstrual problems after the shot. Well, here now, finally, July 15, 2022, Science Magazine reports thousands report unusual menstruation patterns after COVID shot.
Thousands.
Reuters, 6 months ago, EU investigates reports of menstrual disorders after COVID shots. Then we got India today. Excuse me, that's the wrong story. But so there's clear examples now in these cases where it's coming to light. But again, the CDC is emailing Twitter and social media companies saying, look, the people talking about these things a year ago are spreading misinformation. And those people
it's like we said, today's misinformation is a year from now's breaking news.
Yeah, but that's the worst thing about it. I mean, in one hand, it's sort of like maybe it's an affirmation, right? A lot of the independent media are like, "We told you, we feel good, pat ourselves on the back." But at the same time, man, that doesn't feel good to know that we were out there trying to just and not spread quote unquote conspiracies, but just saying, "Hey guys, there's people warning about these things. Hey, some people did get the shot, like you said, and now they're having problems." And the answer was, don't talk about them. That's disinformation. That's fake. Don't say that out loud. They're not real. If you talk about that, you'll be banned, right? But then a year later, it's okay for the corporate media to say, oh, by the way, this stuff is happening, And I'm not saying, we're sitting around waiting for an award for independent media who is talking about this. But the worst thing is that people are suffering with these injuries now, whether that's cardiovascular, myocarditis, or that's menstrual problems, or that's semen problems.
I think it's interesting. A certain aspect of the whole social media phenomena, in this nation, we talk about, your freedom of expression and not being censored. And then, people tell you, oh, that's an independent company. And we can test that in different ways. Right. But at the same time, you see the effect of it. And in this way, you see different reactions by alphabet soup authoritarians. It's like it's almost easier to silence the voice than to offer a counter narrative to it. And I think that might be a little bit of a new phenomenon, because it was really hard to silence pamphleteers and people just putting flyers out, because it was something like almost insidious about it, right? They could go anywhere and just leave a flyer with tons of information. And this is a lot bigger strokes. And I guess I don't know where we go with that, but it is uncanny that you see how much of it is revealed later. Every time through our history, we see how much of mistakes are revealed later. So of course, at the time, the loudest voice wants everyone else to shut up. But it could be any subject. It doesn't necessarily have to be what we're looking at right here with all these stories. It could be economic data too big to fail, right? It could be, oh no, don't talk about recession. There was all the people talking about the food shortages and all the people talking about the economy and the recession and all that made people not believe in the dollar anymore, that made this stuff happen. I mean, where's the line drawn? And I guess one thing I would say the most here is we looked at these social media companies, a decade ago or something, like, oh, look, you can put your stuff there. Well, no, you can only put your approved stuff there. And that's what we need to really see them as, and it is unfortunate in a way that, the lamestream news and all that kind of totes a 4 a.m. talking points all day long till the next 4 a.m. Right. And who knows who provides those. I'm really suspect about that. But thank goodness for outlets like KPFT, because in the face of getting thrown off YouTube for questioning the latest flavor of the month, look how quickly they expect you to just believe in the latest flavor of the month. Don't doubt anything in it. I mean, don't ask, is this really peach flavor? Don't ask, why do these people not think it is? Because then you're gone, and every future thing you have to say, you have to find a insidious new way back onto these platforms if you want to reach the people there. And that's kind of like part of the new phenomenon with social media, and we're in and out of this trilemma.
Well, yeah, I want to go on. Guys, you're listening to Live Free, Think Free. We're here on 90.1 KPFT Houston and on the Conscious Resistance. We're talking about people being censored through social media for speaking out. And I have one more story to share in that regard, Micah, but I wanted to just actually point out something. This is kind of funny here, is that the story that I just shared with you, the article that I just went over, I recently relaunched my YouTube channel, and I was after getting taken down in October 2020 for spreading misinformation about COVID, I decided, okay, I'll start a new YouTube channel. And the story that I just shared with you, that we just shared on KPFT, was just taken down from YouTube a couple days ago because they said it's misinformation. Literally, that story about censorship was just taken down from YouTube 2 days ago. And so I can't share it on YouTube, but I can share it on KPFT. And that's what, one of the reasons we're happy. But I wanted to show another example of this. For those who know the name Alex Berenson, he's the former health reporter of the New York Times. And they seemed to love him until COVID happened. And he started reporting things they didn't like and saying things they didn't like. He was, removed from the New York Times. And then in 2021, he was first suspended and eventually banned from Twitter. He actually filed a lawsuit against Twitter, and he won that lawsuit. And I think he settled out of court, and they reinstated his account once they showed that they couldn't prove that he had spread any misinformation. Well, in that lawsuit, he was able to get, do some discovery and get some documents. And he has emails and internal Slack channels, the workplace communication platform from Twitter, that show that after a Twitter meeting with the White House, they specifically named him and said, how was the White House meeting? And overall, pretty good. They had one really tough question about why Alex Berenson hasn't been kicked off the platform. So here you have an example of the White House literally naming a specific person and saying, why haven't they been kicked off the platform? And he's now got those emails and got those documents, and apparently he'll have more to come. And, so the evidence is piling up. I just want to say that the evidence is piling up that governments and corporations are colluding. And the way I ended my article on this is just this, with this sentence, that the United States is now home of open coordination and suppression of unpopular views between governments and corporations. And if we don't stop this, we're going to continue to experience incremental loss of privacy, freedom of speech, and I also think bodily autonomy, because, that's kind of part of the whole thing, right? But yeah, just wanted to share those examples. And the other story I wanted to mention as we wrap up this little COVID segment here is that, again, people talking about the effects of the shots, the vaccines a year ago were being banned. You're still called crazy if you say that people are suffering myocarditis. If you say anything like, hey, maybe all these sports players who are dying suddenly, if you even Google the term died suddenly and you look at all those articles and, make connections between the people who had the shots, you're crazy. But yet we continue to have evidence that there are problems related to cardiovascular problems. Dr. Peter McCullough has said this. This is a new study. It's preprint, so it hasn't been officially published yet, but you can find it at preprints.org. It's going to be published in, what is the journal? I think it's Cardiology, and it's titled Cardiovascular Effects of the BNT Vaccine, mRNA COVID Vaccine in Adolescents. And it's basically studying the focus on myocarditis and pericarditis events happening after vaccine injection in Thai adolescents. And they have some conclusions here. Cardiovascular effects in this Pfizer vaccine include tachycardia, palpitation, and myocarditis. The clinical presentation of myopericarditis after vaccination was usually mild, with all cases fully recovering within 14 days. Hence, adolescents receiving this should be monitored for side effects. So even though they're claiming that they're fine within 14 days, is a big admission. Now they're straight up saying that myocarditis is, one of these effects. And although we have heard that discussed to some extent, it has still largely been seen as a conspiracy to say that anything like, when you see these stories of, and I mean, I there's a lot of headlines out there, perfectly healthy young man, teenager, whatever. And I'm not saying they're all because of the shots, but there clearly is a connection. Now, how big is the connection? Well, we need to find out. We should be investigating. And the CDC, unfortunately, is not tracking people after the shots to keep up with this. But we'll have to keep an eye on that study. Like I said, it's preprint. I'm not claiming it's 100% fact or that, there's not more to say on that, but it is just another piece of the information out there in relation to that conversation.
Definitely. And I think some of this stuff we're talking about matters on a kind of a view of truth, whether you see it as like a instant representation of all factual knowledge, or if you see it as an unfolding. And obviously, if you're ready to go out there and deplatform people for having the wrong view, you see it the first way and you already know everything, right? So I don't know. I think having the conversation is good. And I don't know. I think that people will be attracted to the sensible ideas. I had one other little bit of COVID news, and then I really wanted to get into some discussion of cash. And I'd like to just hit these points on this one. And it's about the money, basically, in the COVID-19 vaccine. And it pushes further a point that you've been talking about, Derrick, the collusion, the merger of corporate and governmental interests. And this, often with that, what we see is the public bearing the brunt of the expense, and basically a small group of elite private people raking in the benefits. This isn't talking about your bread shop down at the corner that struggles every day to make a capital gain. This is talking about, people that get money from the government, but then put it in their pocket when the return comes. So, yeah, it turns out there were 1,977 clinical trials addressing COVID-19 therapeutics and vaccines from January 1st, 2020 to August 31st, 2021. And this is all out of a new study, funding sources of therapeutic and vaccine clinical trials for COVID-19 versus non-COVID-19 indications, which was published August 16th in JAMA Network Open. And among them, it turns out that 1,144 or 57.9% were funded by public sources. I thought that was interesting. It turns out that 27% were paid by the industry, and another 14.8% were funded by public-private partnerships. So, you got that 14% that's already blurred, a PPP. What more corporatist entity could there really be? I don't really know. I mean, public-private partnership. Most of the studies, 85%, focused on developing anti-COVID-19 therapeutics instead of vaccines, 15% according to the study. For therapeutics, the public sector paid 61.8% of the studies. With another one, they pay or 24.6% funded by the private sector, and 228, where 13.6% were paid by the PPPs. So, yeah, you've got strongly the majority paid for by the public, and then you put in the PPP, there's some public money in there as well. So for vaccines, the pharmaceutical industry paid for 42% of the studies. Public funding covered the cost of 35% of clinical trials, and PPPs paid for 15% of clinical trials. So, yeah, I did want to bring that up. I think it's interesting when we see where the money, comes from. While Pfizer does make the profits, and I'm sure others make the profits too. And we've talked about Pfizer for some time, but I want to move on now. And there's so many things, and there's so little time.
I'm glad you found that.
Yeah, that it's interesting to know that the majority of the money was basically an investment of the people in a way. Yeah. So it turns out I got this one out of BBC that I'd like to cover. People turning back to cash as prices rise. I think, we've talked about this on the show in different ways throughout time, but post officers in Britain handled 801 million pounds in personal cash withdrawals in July, the most since records began 5 years ago, and up more than 20% from a year earlier. It turns out that Natalie Sini is chair of the Cash Action Group, said it shows that people make different assumptions what it means, but she says it assumes that it shows that people are literally counting the pennies as they grapple with the rising prices. She says it's absolutely because of cost of living crisis. And she moves on to say people will be taking out cash and physically putting it into pots, saying, this is what I have for bills, basically setting aside the monthly bills. So they have it right there and they can see it and they know it's there and nobody can take it from them. This is what I have for food and this is what I have left. It turns out, an example they show is this university student, Kira Haywood, who turned to social media for inspiration to help her cope with the rising costs. And it basically, she learned to take cash out of her bank account. She limits her spending by using what she calls budget binders for cash. She puts in different labeled envelopes to ensure she has money for food, money for bills. She says, I went on Instagram and YouTube and I saw these physical budget binders and I take the money out of the bank and I budget for things like my shopping. And I know I have 80 pounds in my personal shopping for the month. And I know I can't go over that. With more high street bank branches closing, Ms. Seeley says there's a need for post offices and shared banking services to allow people to get the cash that they need, especially for vulnerable or elderly people who don't have access to digital banking. The reality is digital doesn't work for everyone, she said. Millions of people don't have access to computers or smartphones, and so we need to keep cash viable. I thought that was interesting, and it doesn't come from like Kitco or something. I mean, that's straight from the BBC. So there's a lot of, and I realized that as I dug into this article, there's a lot more going on where they're examining resurgence in cash and euro and people's right to actually use cash and not to basically be squeezed out. There's another article I'd like to get into real quick, the guaranteeing freedom of payment choice access to cash in the euro area. And I know we don't have time to get into this one as much as I'd like. And perhaps we just talk about they see that as cash infrastructure involves a fixed cost, meaning that less cash means more cost per unit to provide ATMs, things like that. And they, in the end, believe that, the euro system is committed to guaranteeing access to cash to preserve the freedom of payment choice and financial inclusion of euro area citizens. On the basis of the most recent European Central Bank data, cash is the dominant means of payment in the euro area for daily transactions. Many citizens use cash as their only payment option, either by preference or because they have no access to digital means of payment. Shrinking cash infrastructure can affect the way citizens choose to pay. That's very something to think about right there, right? And create barriers to the financial inclusion of vulnerable social groups. To prevent these problems, the euro system is developing and using a wide range of tools to define, measure, and access to cash in terms of profound and rapid change. It is paying close attention to developments and initiatives undertaken in economies where cash use has declined, like in Switzerland, where you can hardly even get cash. There's scarcely any cash.
That's really interesting that they're highlighting that, and that it's actually, like you said, on the BBC and even the European Central Bank. We're all out of time today, but I'm glad you ended with that on a little bit of positive note, Micah. Maybe for people out there who are concerned about being forced into a digital world, might get a little bit of hope that there's some pushback. Guys, we'll be back next week. Please go to kpft.org, make an investment in the name of our show, Live Free, Think Free. Visit thehoustonfreethinkers.com. You can check out the Homesteading on a Budget workshop right there and find out all that and more. Till next time, peace.